You're tuned into the Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast, brought to you by Xenopucks. Here are your hosts, Andy and Brian Matusi.
I have good news for you. If you're a fan of shorter episodes, this is definitely going to be one because it's been a pretty quiet week throughout the NHL. Welcome to Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast. I'm Andy along with Brian here. As always, shows presented by Xenopucks. Like I just mentioned, hasn't been a very eventful week this last week in the NHL, which I guess isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there's still a couple weird things going on that we want to talk about. Brian, what's up?
Yeah, I mean, if you consider a 20-game suspension uneventful, then it was a very uneventful week, or back-to-back misconducts, an uneventful week.
I consider that an uneventful week, given what we've been seeing. Yes.
Let's jump into it though right away. So, 20-game suspension for Aaron Ekblad on the Panthers. Failed a PED test. Claims that he was taking something to recover from an injury he was facing. Didn't get approval from doctors or the league or what have you. And the long and short of it is he's going to miss. I think now the Panthers have played a couple games since the suspension, so I think he's got 17 or 18 games left on it. But that suspension will take him through the remainder of the regular season for the Panthers, who are currently sitting atop the Atlantic. And it'll keep him, more importantly, it'll keep him out for the first two games of the Stanley Cup playoffs, which, depending on their opponent, could be a huge loss for the Panthers. Andrew, how are you feeling seeing the news, and how you feeling about the remainder of the regular season and start of the playoffs for the Panthers, now missing probably their best defenseman?
Well, I think the fact that it's already never mind that we're not even to the playoffs yet, it's already detrimental to the team, because you're looking at a Panthers team that's fighting to stay in the top of the Atlantic right now, but they're already without Matthew Tkachuk for the rest of the season. Brad Marchand hasn't made his debut yet, so it's already a team not struggling, but already kind of down on their luck. And now you take away the team's best defenseman, and now they're really struggling to maintain that position. I think it's going to be a rough run to the finish. I mean, the good news is, unless this team just absolutely tanks, they're still going to make the playoffs. So you got that going. But for a team that's trying to hold that number one spot, this is bad. And, people have been out there saying, oh, well, I can understand him using them to try and recover from an injury. Yeah, but
that's also what every player who gets, but
yeah,
say they all say they get busted.
So, and it's not our job to say whether he's telling the truth or not. It's not our job to speculate. That's just the information we have. Now, he is a very injury-prone player. I will say that his career has been plagued by injury, but I don't see it. But at the same time, he's a skilled enough player. He's a good enough defenseman where I don't think he needs performance-enhancing drugs either to be a better player. So, I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about it, but a violation's a violation, so it just is what it is. I mean, it makes me a little concerned for the team moving forward the rest of the way.
The thing that concerns me the most, and this may be alleviated if they don't have to play Tampa in round one, which if they hold this lead, and now Tampa's actually caught up, and now Tampa's second in the division, passing Toronto. There's a very easy or very good chance that Tampa and the Panthers don't play each other in round one. So ultimately, this may not have a huge effect, but with how hot the Sens are right now, I mean, you never know if they draw the Sens or the Maple Leafs in round one. I mean, it could give you problems those first couple of games, and sometimes you can get in over, or a lot of times in the playoffs, you can get in over your head very quickly when you're missing key players like that. So it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back from it. Obviously, the addition of Seth Jones now is paramount to this team's success the rest of the way, as far as securing a division title and home ice in the first round of the playoffs, as well as, winning those first couple games of the playoffs without Ekblad. I think it's the good thing for Ekblad is it gives him time to rest up and recover from whatever alleged injury he was dealing with. So, I mean, that's good, again, for a player that's very injury prone. But, yeah, certainly one that if the Panthers get bounced in round one and, they have a rough start to games 1 and 2, you look back and say, well, could this have been the difference? So hopefully not the case for the Panthers. Truthfully, I don't envision it being a super big issue. But, again, if they run into a scenario where they're out in round one, that's definitely when they're going to look back and say, okay, was defensive play, responsible for why we had an early exit and so on. So we don't want to speculate too much because anything can happen, but that's a huge loss. And with how cut and dry the rules are surrounding PEDs, there's really no wiggle room for Ekblad to try and get back in and get back before the full suspension served.
Yeah, my thing is, I don't see a situation where the Panthers bounce in round one. As we know from years past, anything can happen to anybody once the playoffs start, but I don't think it happens. And I just don't think that's something we're going to have to worry about regardless. I will say the addition of Seth Jones has been nice. I like what I've seen from him so far. He's very aggressive on the puck, on the ice. He's willing to sacrifice himself to make a play. I like what I've seen out of him so far. So I think he's a good fit, which I assumed he was going to be anyway.
Yeah. I'd have to agree with that. I mean, he fits the kind of game they play. So again, especially regular season, I truthfully do not envision this being a super big issue long term. But again, you never know. The missing the 2 playoff games, especially the first 2 of their opening series. I mean, that's a huge one. So we'll see what happens. But it's something to keep an eye on as we close in on the end of the regular season. Other things to keep an eye on are some teams that have really been heating up since we came back from the Four Nations break. We got 3 teams that we're going to address here that have been great and 2 that have not been good at all. So we're going to start with the positive here. We mentioned the Sens a little bit ago about potentially round 1 opponents for the Panthers. I think I mentioned the Sens, unless I'm just going crazy. But the Sens have been hot. They've climbed back into the playoff race. They are winners of their last 6. They are 7-2-1 in their last 10. And as it sits right now, if the season ends today, they are drawing the Florida Panthers in the first round. So the Sens, partially behind the great play of Linus Ullmark, have really propelled themselves into this race. And now, we talked at the start of the season, Detroit, Buffalo, and Ottawa, who's going to take the step. And it's starting to look like it might be Ottawa's time finally to exit the depths of hell and at least get into the postseason.
Well, this is excuse me. This is exactly how everybody was expecting this team to come out looking from the start of the season. So it's finally starting to happen now. We're really starting to see what they're capable of. Ullmark's playing up to his full potential right now. He's looked phenomenal his last 5. I think he's at 5 wins in a row right now, looking real good. So I think this is where we start to realize, hey, maybe it's time to not sleep on Ottawa because they have a chance at being a legitimate contender if they can keep playing like this.
I still question if the depth is going to be enough for them long term. But again, behind a great goalie, anything's possible. And I think when they got Linus Ullmark, I think this is, as you said, this is kind of what we expected of this team to kind of punch through. And if Ullmark can play great, then they're going to be great. And it's starting to shape up that way. Another team within the division as well that's really been heating up is Montreal. The problem that they're faced with is, first of all, they're just simply not as good on paper. So that's the glaring flaw. The goaltending is not good enough in Montreal right now. It's just not. But again, 7-1-2 in their last 10. They've technically by points percentage been the second hottest team in the last little bit here. I think only the Hurricanes have been better, who we're going to talk about in a second. But Montreal, again, the big problem they're going to face, as good as they are playing right now, is they have so many teams that are in that group with them. You have Columbus, who's kind of starting to fade away, unfortunately, a little bit. We'll talk about them later. And you have Detroit, who's still in it, but is starting to fade away. Then you have the Rangers, who have come to life enough to get themselves back into a playoff spot now. And so with how good Ottawa is and some of these other teams still around them, Montreal is going to need to essentially play this good the rest of the way. Otherwise, there's just not enough room for them to squeak in. I mean, they're playing this good right now, and they're still on the outside looking in. And the Rangers, who have been so as of late, have still climbed back in. So the reality is that they're going to have to keep this pace if they're going to make the playoffs, because they just don't have enough points right now, and the goaltending's just not quite been good enough for them to sustain this the rest of the way, unless they can continue to score and they can keep winning games. I mean, winning 7 of 10. I mean, they have 16 games left. They're basically going to have to win, you would imagine, probably 12, 13 of them to have a chance to get into the postseason. Oh, no question.
I don't know. It's weird to see. I think ultimately, I think they do it though. I think.
Okay, so who's the team that falls off then? Because right now, again, they're still behind the Rangers. They're still fighting with the Jackets and with the Red Wings as well. I mean, And all three of those teams have the same amount of games played too. There's only a handful of points separating the three of them. So who does Columbus stay away? Do the Rangers fall off? What happens for Montreal to squeak in here? Because again, as it sits right now, they have to pass. They have to pass the Rangers, and they could still theoretically be passed by the Blue Jackets.
Absolutely. I think Columbus stays away, if I'm being 100% honest. And that's not a dig at Columbus. I still just don't think this is it yet. I think Columbus stays away.
It's sad.
Yeah. And but again, that's a team where they weren't even expected to be where they are this year. So you can't really be mad if you're a Jackets fan. But I think Columbus stays away is what happens.
All right, fair enough. And then, So then you assume they stay hot enough to pass the Rangers then too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really anybody's guess because who knows what the Rangers are going to do either. So, but I feel like the Rangers have just gotten hot at the right time. But we'll see because the Rangers, on paper, should be a good team. So,
yeah, theoretically.
But like I said, it's anybody's guess because once you get into the playoffs, anybody can win the Stanley Cup too. So.
Now, we'll talk about the Hurricanes as well. As it sits right now, they're the hottest team in the league. Their last 10, they're 8-2, including 7 in a row. Everything's going right for the Canes right now. You wonder where the morale would be at with all the crap that happened with Mikko Rantanen. The team has held the fort pretty well before and since this trade. So, I mean, something's going right for them. And again, it looks like Stankoven's actually a good fit there. But again, we're gonna run into the same thing again when we get into the playoffs this year. Is that just the team can't score? They are worse now than they were at the start of the season, and they did nothing to address their lack of scoring. And in fact, they had Natchez, who's one of the league's best scorers, and they traded him away for Rantanen, who was one of the league's best scorers, and then traded him away for Stankoven, who in his own right is a great player, but is not. Again, and we talked about this last time too, but they did nothing. Scorer. Yeah, exactly. They did nothing to address their glaring flaw, which is not being able to score in the playoffs. And again, they didn't address their crap goaltending. I'm sorry, it's just not good enough. It hasn't been good enough to put them over the hump, and it's still not going to be. And I just don't know what the thought process here. I know Eric Tolsky's technically, it's his first year as a GM, but boy, it really feels like a missed opportunity there in Carolina, where you see how well this team can play, but the game gets tighter and tighter in the playoffs, and things close up. There's a lot less scoring chances seemingly. And for a team that already kind of struggles, I don't want to say struggles to score, but struggles to score in the playoffs, that's not a great look. I mean, it's not a winning formula. And I say, I mentioned that their goaltending is not good enough, but they are statistically, I believe they are one of the best defensive teams in the league. But again, it's all about, they play that super structured game. Yeah. Hurricanes, I believe 6th best defense in the league as far as goals allowed. But again, that's been their MO, the last half decade plus is shut it the hell down on defense and just squeeze the wins out of your opponent. And that's usually what they do in the regular season. And it gets to the playoffs and the format changes a little bit. And all of a sudden they can't score and they're losing all these games. Well, here we are again. I mean, it feels unfair to dump on them at times, but it's the whole, the textbook definition of insanity. You do the same thing and expect a different result. And that's kind of what it seems like the Hurricanes have done. So as good as they are right now, I just truthfully question, will this translate to anything in the postseason? Because it certainly feels like this year has had the same feeling as years past, where they go in hot as a pistol and just get absolutely beat to death because they can't score.
Well, I sit there and I wonder, and I was like, okay, so what's the problem they're having trying to figure shit out? Because it's not like Don Waddell left that team in shambles by any means. So, I mean, they're still a decent organization. So what aren't you figuring out now? That's what I'm not understanding.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. And again, I know they did get a little bit thinner on the back end too, with losing Pesci in the offseason and then Shea. So I know it's not perfect there, but again, they're still a really solid defensive team. Clearly, I mean they are, but again, Freddie Anderson's play is always up in the air. He could, we've seen him go down with injuries at any given time, and again, the thing that has killed them is that lack of goal scoring, and they just outright refuse to address it, and it's not good. And truthfully, they're right as it sits right now. They're looking at a first round matchup with the Devils, again, another team who can shut it down pretty well on defense. And if Markstrom's on top of his game, that's one of the best goalies in the league. So,
right.
I don't know, man. It's just really hard for me to envision this going anywhere for the Hurricanes except where it's gone the last several years. So
golf
I do want to,
course.
yeah, exactly. It's annoying to have to just predict that they're making their Cancun trip at the end of April, middle of May, but that's largely what we've seen of them. And again, it feels unfair to dump on them, but they keep doing the same shit over and over. It's like we picked on the Avalanche for so long about the goaltending. Well, they shut us up by getting a goalie, and now they're one of the best teams in the league. So
yeah, I would argue they're a cup favorite at this point. So
yeah, they got to be right up there. Although you can really pick your poison any of those big four in the West, or big five now, because LA's kind of jumped into the mix too. They've been, they've won their last five, and they're starting to. It looks like they're starting to get things figured out, and LA's been really good on the defensive front this year. So we'll see what happens with them. But I wanted to at least give the Hurricanes some love, because as it sits right now, again, they are the hottest team in the league. So you have to give credit where it's due. And
100%.
The goaltending has been holding up right now. It's just
when do the levees break?
Yeah, I was going to say we've seen this movie before, so something to keep an eye on as well. We also have some teams who have been playing piss poorly that we're going to talk about now. We're going to get away from the good teams. So Detroit was right in the mix, and they had a really rough couple of weeks, especially those 2 losses in a row to the Blue Jackets really hurt them. But they are kind of in a tailspin right now, 3-7 in their last 10, and it's starting to – they're still in it right now. They're only a couple points out of the last playoff spot. They have the same amount of games played as Columbus and Montreal, sorry. And they have 1 fewer game played than the Rangers. So again, there's room there for them to kind of squeeze back into this mix, but they really kind of shot themselves in the foot a little bit now, because now what seemed like all they'd have to do is play slightly above 500 hockey to get in. Now they're going to have to be unbelievable the rest of the way to get in.
Yeah. And I mean, they're 3-7-0 in their last 10. That's a pretty tough look. And look, I know you can argue about what happened in the Stadium Series. We're past that, because even after that game, it's been downhill for them. Dylan Larkin, this is another thing. Dylan Larkin does not look the same ever since the Four Nations face-off tournament. I don't know what happened. I don't know if he's playing injured. I'm not sure what's going on, but he has not been the same. And he was aggressive in that Four Nations face-off.
Yeah, he was actually one of their best players.
Yeah, exactly. And now he's come back and he's mediocre performance. And again, I'm not trying to dig at the guy, and this isn't a dig at the Wings, because I actually like the Wings. Like, I'm not a Wings fan, but I love watching them. And I'm not sure what's happening. And it makes you start to question, is the Yzer plan even a thing? And I still ultimately say yes. I think you should still trust him. The guy knows what he's doing. If you look at what he built in Tampa, those teams that won the Cup were Yzerman teams.
It's like Stan Bowman winning in Chicago with Dale Talon's team.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think, because I've seen people just bashing Yzerman online, and Yzerman's not the problem. It's tough, man. It's tough to watch, because we even sat here before the season started, and I was like, yeah, Detroit's definitely squeaking into the playoffs this year. Well, if they get in now, they will definitely be squeaking in.
Well, put it this way. If they get into the playoffs now, they'll enter the playoffs as one of the hottest teams in the league, because they're going to have to win. They have 16 games left. You have to imagine, I mentioned the same thing with Montreal. If they're in the playoffs, they're probably winning 12 or 13 of these final games. I mean, they're just going to have to go on an absolute tear, given all the traffic and congestion that's around them in the standings. It seems like their only way in now is to become one of the hottest teams in the league.
I agree, but I think they have the capability to do that. I truly do. I don't think any of it's going to be due to Peter Mrazek. I think that was a waste of a trade, if I'm being completely honest.
He hasn't even played for them, I don't think.
Yeah, he has.
Has he?
Yeah, he played the other night.
Oh, geez.
Their first game after they traded. I forgot who was against, but he played.
Well, similar to half the other teams in the league, Detroit's goaltending simply isn't good. That's the biggest problem that they have, is that Talbot, Lyon, and I guess Mrazek now are just not good goalies. And so the reality they're facing is as solid as the team is for the most part. I mean, as far as being competitive enough to get into the playoffs, that there's something there, but it's with no goaltending. I mean, it's easy to see why they have a -20 goal differential, and I don't know. It's a tough spot again. Like I said, they're going to have to be one of the hottest teams in the league to fight their way back into the playoffs. So as we approach the finish line here, it seems like Ottawa found the winning formula. Clearly, again, we mentioned those 3 teams, and everybody's mentioned those 3 teams: Buffalo, Ottawa, and Detroit, who's getting over the hump. Clearly, the Sabres haven't figured that out, as they are dead last in the conference once again for for the 80th time in a row.
Yeah.
And then Detroit, it just doesn't seem like they have enough time left to correct it now. So it does seem like Ottawa may be the team that solves this puzzle. But again, you assume if Detroit finds a way in that Montreal doesn't find the way in. So it's going to be an interesting race to the finish here. I am excited to see that wild card race. It was kind of anticlimactic last year with how everything just kind of blew up at the end for Ottawa, Detroit especially, and Washington just kind of backed into their playoff spot last year because Ottawa and Detroit were just so bad at the end that, or not even so bad. Detroit was actually pretty decent, but they had so much ground to make up that they couldn't catch up at the end. So
right. Well, they went on that. What was it, like an 8-game losing skid too, right there at the end that kind of screwed them out of their playoff spot.
And then they went on the 8-game skid, and then they followed that up by winning quite a few and some pretty intense games in the final week and a half, 2 weeks of the season. That the one I think everyone remembers, I think, was that game it was against Montreal where Goss Despair jumps 10 feet in the air to keep the puck alive, and I think Lucas Raymond snipes it to tie the game, and then things just didn't fall their way, and of course Washington ended up in the playoffs. This year it seems even less likely that they get in now. So something to keep an eye on as we, again, go down the stretch here. But I want to switch conferences and mention the fact that, similar to the struggles Detroit has had, you look on the other side of the league at Minnesota, who is similar spot, 3-6-1 in their last 10. Obviously, the injuries have played a little bit of a role for the Wild this year. They've really missed significant time from a lot of significant players. Still without Kaprizov, who has essentially only played 3 games since like the middle of December. They've been without Kaprizov. They've been without Eriksson Ek. They've been without Brodin. You're missing 3 of your best players, but the league keeps going whether you're healthy or not. So now they're in a spot where they still have a decent cushion in the playoffs, but St. Louis, who beat them last night, is actually rolling lately, is sneaking up on them. Calgary's still in the mix with 2 games in hand, mind you. Vancouver is they're in the, I can't believe Vancouver climbed into that playoff spot, but again, Vancouver's still in the mix too. And so they have some teams catching them now, but for the Wild, letting that divisional spot slip away is hurt because not only have they lost their home ice, now they've lost their divisional spot. And so as it sits right now, if the season ended today, they'd be looking at a round 1 date with Vegas, a team that they clearly cannot beat. So for the Wild right now, while I think the road ahead isn't as rough as it is for Detroit, I think the big concern for them is that when are Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov and Brodin coming back? I mean, you're missing your best player, your best center, and your best or second best defenseman, depending on how you look at Brodin. And they couldn't add at the deadline because none of these guys were on season-ending LTIR. So they need to get these guys healthy and get them back in the lineup so they can start winning before that cushion they have on the playoffs slips away from them because of missing the playoffs this season after the start they had. I know they've dealt with injuries, but missing the playoffs after the historic start they had is just not acceptable.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough to watch any team that good miss the playoffs. I mean, it's frustrating whether you're a fan or not, but especially when you're a fan. Dude, shit happens, man. Is it acceptable? No, but I mean, what do you do this late in the season at this point? I mean, it's
and that's the whole thing is it's like they need to get those 3 guys back because they fell into a spot where they couldn't do anything, and it is what it is. But now they need to get these guys back healthy so they can play. I mean, Kaprizov's historically been a guy who is good as he is when he comes back from an injury, needs a couple of weeks to get everything going again, which I'm okay with, but he's got to get back before the playoffs or they're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah. And again, like you said, such a great start to the season. And when we started the season, we were like, man, Minnesota
they were
looks
first in
like
the league at one point, which it's hard to believe now. I mean, they're clearly not going to get to that point this season, but at one point it was them and Washington 1 and 2, which Washington is still hanging in there. But, Gus's play the last little bit hasn't been great either, quite frankly. His save, I mean, he had a great win against the Avalanche last week, but other than that, you look at his save percentages. He had a .917 against Seattle, which was not bad considering he got peppered, but he had a real stinker against Vancouver that I wasn't crazy about. Again, the win over Colorado was good. The loss to the Rangers wasn't crazy about. I didn't get to watch most of that game, but watching the highlights, I really didn't like how the team looked. But again, allows 3 goals, just barely over a .900 save percentage. Last night against the Blues, he was terrible, but the team was also not that great. They muffed most of their scoring chances. So it's hard to win when you don't score, but he's just gone through these little stretches. And again, he's got the 6th best save percentage in the league. I mean, he is one of the better goalies in the league, but down the stretch here in these very important games when the team needs him to be his best, there's been a couple of games where he's just not been. And I'll set the game against Colorado aside because the Wild, no matter what, seemingly usually played the Avalanche very well. And him stopping 27 of 28 in a shootout win, I would say is about as impressive as it gets.
Correct.
But other than that, there's just some games where he hasn't looked good. And, Fleury's recent starts haven't been the best either, which he gets a free pass because he is the
40.
GOAT. Yeah.
Oh, well,
so,
okay, both of those things.
but, so I again, Flowers' play hasn't been perfect, but I mean, they're riding Gus here and he needs to be on top of his shit the rest of the way, or at least until these guys get back in. And again, I know a lot of it will be alleviated and the team plans to have all 3 of these guys back before the playoffs. So I know it's not the end of the world, but with teams breathing down your neck, you got to jump on top of this.
I 100% agree. So I mean, goaltending ultimately, I think, if anything, it's ultimately going to be their goaltending. That's their downfall. And that's nothing against Fleury or Gus, but I mean, this is kind of the farewell tour for Fleury anyway.
Yeah.
So, which is sad.
It is. So we'll see how it goes. And again, we're going to keep an eye on the St. Louis Blues the next couple of weeks because they've really turned it on now that they've had more time under Montgomery. I don't want to spend too much time with them today as they are still a couple points out of the playoffs. They're still battling to get and stay in this mix here. But again, if they continue to play as well as they have been, so winners of 7 of their last 10, we're going to have to kind of break down the resurgence they've had this season because it was a nightmare start to their season. And now things are starting to look like there's that beacon of hope for the Blues. And Utah, to a lesser extent, too. They still have more work to do. But, I mean, there's a chance. There is a world that exists where Utah squeaks into the playoffs here. So a couple things to keep an eye on out west as we move along. But we don't want to dive into them too much as nothing is quite certain. And we're still a little too far away from the end of the season to really start, investigating each and every individual's team who's in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So...
All right. Well, let's move on here. Before we take our break, I just want to give a quick shout out real quick to one of the league's best, the Nate Dog, Nathan Mackinnon, hit 1,000 career points this past week. So very exciting for him, obviously. About as good a player in the National Hockey League as there is. He's fast as anybody. He shoots as well as anybody. His hands are as good as anybody. According to ESPN.com, he is the number 1 ranked player in fantasy. If you look purely from a statistical standpoint, he leads the league in assists with 75, leads the league in points with 102, which is unbelievable. 26 plus minus, which is really good. Again, not a stat we usually pay too close attention to, but being that high, especially for a guy who scores a lot on the power play, to still be a plus 26 is pretty good. So, I mean, he's got 33 power play points. So, just a super effective player, though. Again, about as good as they come as far as quality of player. A great guy, super big ambassador for this game. Just really well loved by pretty much everybody. I don't really think I've ever heard anybody say anything bad about McKinnon, except maybe some Dallas fans. And that's about it. Maybe some Chicago fans too. But yeah, he's just a really talented player, and obviously it's hard to be in the spotlight when you have a guy like McDavid who's somehow even better. Although this season it's been all Nate Dogg. McDavid's actually had what's for him a bad season, so McKinnon really just living his best life this year, leads the league in scoring, just won the Four Nations tournament with Canada. So congrats to McKinnon, who just continues to impress year over year.
McKinnon, who continues to be the Nathan MacKinnon of Nathan McKinnons.
Yeah, and he's a freak of nature with how good he is. It really just feels like he's a right-handed Sidney Crosby. Like they're basically from the same place. They're both champions, and they're both international champs. Like they're both just really good players, and it's cool, man. We're very fortunate to have such skilled players like this in the league who are leaps and bounds better. I mean, there's only a select few of them, but he is definitely one of them. So very excited for him to see where his career continues to take him. And just a gentle reminder, he's still only 29.
The thing I love about him the thing I love about those situations is that he plays for Colorado, which is a team a lot of people hate, but everybody loves Nathan MacKinnon. So that's just one of my favorite things about it. And it's fun to watch him. And like you said, we're lucky that we live in the era we do, that we get to see all this generational talent.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I think it's crazy. And I mean, we've talked at length about Ovechkin and the Gretzky chase, and we'll actually get to that a little later in the show as well. But yeah, you still need to stop and appreciate all the great talent. That's, even though they're not, setting records like Ovi is, these are still extremely talented players. So congrats to Nate Dogg again. And I'm sure it won't be too long before he sets another milestone or hits another milestone or wins another championship. So we're going to take a break and hear from our friends over at Xenopucks, and we will come back and tackle a couple more quick things before we wrap the show.
That sounds like a plan to me. This is the Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast. It's hockey season, and you're looking to work on your stick handling or maybe even your shot, but ice time just isn't an option for you right now. Luckily, our buddies over at Xenopucks have got you covered. They've developed an elite off-ice practice puck that, in addition to looking like the real thing, is the same size and weight as a regulation hockey puck to give you that authentic feel on the end of your stick. It works better than other off-ice practice pucks on almost any surface, whether you use it on hardwood, carpet, concrete, or even asphalt. Xenopucks glide like a real puck on ice. So if you're looking to improve your game without setting foot on the ice, head over to www.xenopucks.com and get yourself a puck. Check out their merch selection and be sure to follow them on Instagram at Xenopucks.
All right, and welcome back. Again, thanks as always to our friends from Xenopucks for sponsoring the show. So let's carry on here in this second half. It'll really not be much of a second half, but a couple things we want to address. First one, last night's game, Chicago, Vancouver. A little nastiness during that one. Frank Nazar, Connor Bedard, Philip Hronik, and Connor Garland all getting misconducts for their altercation behind, I believe it was the Canucks net in that game. So, rightfully so at that point in the game, the refs just trying to keep things as tame as they can be. But for Bedard, he gets 10-minute misconduct in back-to-back games, which is, again, for a guy who's had what could be described as a frustrating season this year. Just another hit he had to take there. And in this time, his one the other night, it is what it is. It was kind of a weak call too, even then. But this one last night against Vancouver, he gets jumped after the whistle by Hronik, and he ends up being the one that gets the boot. And I didn't really think he got a fair shake on that. So that was kind of a tough look on the officials' part. But again, I can appreciate just trying to keep things tame at that point in the game, and you don't want to let it slip away from you. But Bedard goes down the runway, tosses his helmet, apologizes to the training staff and everybody around him because he was throwing shit. So good luck on him by at least, trying to make things right within his own room. But understandable frustration there. And again, I didn't really like the call for him getting the misconduct because he didn't start that altercation. He was just kind of jumped behind the net. But again, when games start getting out of hand like that, a lot of times the refs will just start tossing guys to keep things under control. So I understand the timing for Bedard couldn't be worse given that he just got tossed out the other night. But yeah, definitely an interesting one. It's very rare you see a superstar. I use that with heavy air quotes, but a star level player getting the boot from a game, 2 games in a row. It's very strange to see. So just wanted to point that out because that was very strange. And again, I don't necessarily agree with Bedard getting the hook last night, but given the context of the game, I can see where the refs are coming from. So even though I don't like it, it is what it is. But for Bedard, I just another thing to add to his long list of reasons why this season has not been great for him or for Chicago. Yeah,
I'm not one to ever stick up for Bedard either. And I'm the first to criticize him, but I don't see anywhere where that's a freaking 10 minutes misconduct for him. The other night was absolutely warranted, but last night, no, not warranted at all. I think it's bullshit, but I'm not a referee, so.
Yeah, it does definitely feel like he got the short end of the stick on that one.
Yeah, no pun intended, but.
Yeah, truthfully. So that was just interesting seeing 4 guys get the boot like that, but it is what it is. Also real quick, before we move on to our OV tracker, just real quick, good luck to the ladies college teams in the Final Four for the NCAA tournament. I think the matchups this coming weekend are Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Ohio State and Cornell. So should be some pretty exciting hockey up ahead this coming weekend. So good luck to the ladies there. And I know the men's teams obviously are finishing their conference championships and getting ready for that tournament as well before the Frozen Four down in St. Louis. So exciting times if you're a college hockey fan are ahead. So it'll be pretty cool as we near the end of the season for that, and those of you who follow minor, junior, and college hockey. But just wanted to give wish the ladies good luck real quick before we moved on to our Ovi tracker. So Ovi, in addition to reaching 1,600 career points this past week, has also now moved up to 887 goals. So he's up 2 from our last show. It's feeling weird, man. He's 7 away from tying the record, and he's 8 away from breaking it. So if he has a hot finish to this month, he might do it before the end of the month, which is weird. It's just really weird.
Yeah. I got to say, too, it's interesting to see with each goal he gets closer, the more haters come out of the woodwork. So it's really fun to watch. I'm enjoying every second of it.
Well, and it's weird, too, because it's just not warranted. I mean, we've talked at length about how everything Ovi's gotten in this league, he's, I would say, pretty well earned. I don't think that's an unfair statement to make, but it is, it's really starting to set in now. Like this is going to happen. And it's just weird that we're this close. So, I mean, obviously I think most normal fans are like, God, can he just score all 8 goals the next game so we can see this already? Because I think we're all equally as impatient when wanting him to get it. And obviously we're all cheering for him. So it just seems that it's a matter of time now. But again, not only is he moving up the all-time goal scoring race, but again, 1,600 career points is no small feat either. I mean, he's on a very select list on that as well. So congrats to Ovi as he just keeps racking up the accolades and the goals.
Absolutely.
All right. I actually did not watch any Jackets games this week because I suck. But for our Blue Jackets,
you didn't miss out.
Yeah, I was going to say, unfortunately, for our Jackets corner this week now, it does seem like I put it in the show notes, just that like reality's setting in, and
that's exactly how I would word it.
It's the best way to phrase it, I guess. I couldn't really think of any other way to put that made sense. But the reality is this team has been punching above its weight class the entire season, even despite the goaltending. The injury to Monahan hasn't helped. Obviously, having time without Marchenko didn't help, and Chinikov was out for a while. There's just key pieces. Obviously, missing Boone Jennifer, even though they played outstanding for the most part in his absence. But ultimately, this team is what it is, and as exciting as it would be to see them make the playoffs and make some noise in the playoffs, it's starting to kind of have that sobering reality, like that they're just not quite there. And I'd love for them to go on a resurgence to finish the year and leapfrog the Rangers again to get back into that playoff spot. But as we mentioned previously with teams like Montreal and Detroit and Ottawa, and there's so much battling going on for these last couple spots now, it's now unfortunately starting to look bleak for our Jackets.
Yeah, again, this is a team that was never expected to be where they are this year. So now that everything's kind of slowing down, this is more of what we were expecting to see at the beginning of the season when we talked about the Jackets. Obviously the storyline's a big factor here. Obviously teams thrive off of, tragic events like that always fuels everybody. But this is exactly what I was expecting the Jackets to look like the whole season, not just right now. Now, with that being said, I think they're just in a slump. I do think the way we've been seeing them play most this season is actually how good they really are. I think they're just in a slump right now. But that being said, again, this is what I thought they were going to look like all season long. So no matter how you feel about it, I think if you're a Blue Jackets fan, you should ultimately be happy with whatever outcome you get this season, because it's been a way better ride than I think anybody was ever expecting it to be.
Yeah, truthfully, and again, it's when your season slips away in front of your eyes, sometimes it's hard to be, I guess, grateful is maybe not the right term I'm looking for, but it's hard to be like, what, everything was okay given everything we dealt with this season. But I think in retrospect, when you look in May and you look in June and they get to the draft, and again, they'll have a top 15 pick more than likely. You start to look at where the team's headed. They did this good with what they had this season, and again, I'm still really high. First of all, I still think Fantilli is going to be one of the best players in the league in the next.
I don't disagree with you on that
but
at all.
That Caden Lindstrom guy they drafted last year, that big center, again, if he can come in and make the noise that the scouts are talking about with him, this team could be set up for a really long time. So I know it's. What's the word I'm looking for? Not frustrating, but I know it's easy to get a little impatient and want the rebuild to be done. But the team's going to have a ton of cap room going into the offseason. They're going to have a chance to go out and sign some giant names. There's some really good talent there now, where in the past it was maybe harder for Columbus, who was restricted on salary when the cap was so low and everybody was spending to it. And, now they have a lot more room to work with. And now they have star talent there. They have Marchenko up front. Monahan's going to be there for a little bit. Boone Jenner, again, a great captain of that team, good energy guy. Olivier just extended there. Again, another real tough guy. On the back end, you have Zach Werenski, who's just the best of the best when it comes to defensemen. I mean, there's a lot of good working pieces there. I know they need to address the goaltending, but the guys in the minors, mostly like Luca Del Bel, Belou's guys that have a great scoring touch to their game. Cole Sillinger's another great, outstanding young player on the Jackets. There are a lot of pieces here for long-term success. So as tough as it can be to watch a season like this get away from you, the understanding and hope that, especially under good management like Don Waddell has provided for this team, that the future is not only very bright, but the bright future could be coming much sooner than expected, with the opportunity to bring in some big names in free agency this offseason.
You said that perfectly. My thing is, with Don Waddell, you have a terrific GM at the helm. And again, I've never been a huge fan of Dean Evison as a head coach, but I really like what he's done with Columbus this year.
He's done fantastic work with the hand he was given, 100%.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I truly you can tell when he's behind the bench, he loves being there. It almost looks like he's a fan. Like during some of these games, like he wants to be there. You can see he wants to win. There's a drive there. I think he's a good fit. Just yet another head coach I was wrong about. But he's been a good fit for Columbus, and I think with Don Waddell at the helm, I think, and you mentioned you got guys like Fantilli and Marchenko and Cole Sillinger. I think this team's got a really bright future. So granted, this team's a couple of years into a rebuild, and they're already showing a lot of potential. So
well, exactly, and again, I'm not going to be Mr. Headlines or rumors here, but again, with how much money they're going to have going into this offseason, you look at potential free agents that are going to be available. You look at a guy like Mitch Marner or somebody like that. I mean, I'm not saying he's the guy, but a player of his skill level, and they'll have the money to bring a guy like that in. A player of his skill level instantly boosts any team. And let's actually, since I picked his name, let's go for him. Let's say Mitch Marner signs with the Jackets this summer. Look at the difference that makes on this team. All of a sudden, now he's instantly on the top line, whether they want to try him at center. I know the Leafs play him on the wing, but whether they want to try him at center or on the wing, I mean, a top line of Marchenko, Monahan, and Marner, the 3M line. Yeah. That's unbelievable right there. I mean, they have a chance to go out and bring in some big talent this offseason, and obviously offer sheets when it's time for RFAs to be qualified. There's going to be a chance for the Jackets to do some damage here, because they've got a little bit of draft capital. They've drafted, I would think, relatively well for the most part. I know, again, the goaltending's the big one, but they have a chance to make a huge splash. Them, and I think Chicago is going to be another big player this offseason, although Chicago doesn't quite have the prospect pool that Columbus has. And I'm not saying Columbus is otherworldly, but Columbus, most of their prospects are, that they were high on, are with the team now and have developed. And again, you have a guy in the minors like Del Bel Belou's, who's going to really offer an enhanced scoring touch when he's a full-time NHLer. It's going to be a world of a difference. I know, again, they missed out on developing Jiricek, but that was mostly poor handling by the previous regime. So that ship you just let sail, and hope you can bring in some more good talent on the back end to pair up with Werenski.
Yeah, but again, there's a silver lining for this team, and I think it's a lot closer than people think it is.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So again, it stinks that the season is likely going to end without playoffs for the Jackets after how fun and how good it's been. But I think the team has done well in Johnny's name this season, given everything they dealt with obviously losing him before the season started. And I think it's been good for the fans. I think a season where they're playing some important games down the stretch like this has been what everybody's needed. And again, the future is still very bright for the group. So it's as tough as it'll be. The ultimate reality is this team would not win the Stanley Cup if they make the playoffs. And so as they look to the future here, there's still plenty of excitement to be had.
Very well said. And we will look forward to the future as the season finishes out and as the postseason is upon us. With that being said, before we wrap this show up, we do have a question, and I have to apologize because there was a brief moment in time where I was locked out of one of our show email accounts. And in that time, somebody sent a question, and this was actually during the Four Nations face-off. But fortunately, we can still make this work on this episode because it's not technically situation specific. So with that being said, this question comes to us from Danny in Florida. It says, "Hey fellas, I've absolutely been loving the Four Nations tournament. I've watched every game and loved every second. I have a few questions for you guys if you have the time. 1, what was your favorite line on each team? 2, I know they put the player's NHL team on the back of the helmet. Don't you think they should have put it somewhere on the jersey as well? 3, I love the 10-minute overtime. Do you think they should implement that in NHL regular play? Thanks, guys. Go USA." And as I know he would say, because I know this guy, go Bolts.
All right. So first of all, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first off, I want to say I'm going to start with the overtime. I actually don't hate that idea. And that's mostly just because I can't stand shootouts. I think shootouts are extremely unexciting. There's nothing cool about shootouts. And I mean, it's due to time constraints. I get it. It's to get shit rolling so guys can get on the plane and bounce. But shootouts are boring. I think it's the most boring way you can end a game. But I would actually rather games end in a tie than watch a shootout. That's just me personally. I know many people would probably disagree. With that being said, I do like the idea of 10-minute 3-on-3 overtime. I think that's phenomenal, and I think it worked very well in the Four Nations tournament. I actually think the Four Nations was good because they did things a little differently, and they show how things that the NHL doesn't do could work if they did, and I think that's one of them. So I say, yeah, give it a shot. Honestly, my thing is if they implement a 10-minute OT, they're still going to implement a shootout anyway. So it just is what it is, but I would love to see that. With the logo on not being on the jerseys, I was actually surprised about that myself. So I got to say it's a good question because I had wondered that myself. You see it in like MLB that they'll have either their team's hat and then they'll have their whatever team they play for, their logo on their jersey. Just things like I was kind of surprised that they didn't do that in the Four Nations, which is fine. But yeah, just figured, it's international play, but it's still an NHL sanctioned event, so they would have had their NHL teams. So,
and I'm going to offer a counterpoint to that for me, it wasn't surprising. I think the stickers on the helmet, first of all, it's easy and cheap to do. So it's easy, makes sense. But the focus on this tournament was the 4 countries. I think you add the individual player or individual team logos to the jersey. It kind of takes away from the country. I mean, I know because it's an NHL tournament, they wanted the team logos on the helmets, but to me, it made sense the way they do it. Not only that, then you have to individually stitch each jersey with a separate team patch. And again, with guys that were injured during the tournament, then you have to bring in another guy, get another patch made, then stitched onto the jersey. It's just, there's layers of why it would have been complicated. So I can see why they didn't do it. And I think having the stickers was sufficient enough, especially being an NHL fan. I already know who these guys play for anyway. So I get that the whole idea is when you're bringing in new fans, you want to show, okay, this guy plays here, this guy plays here. But for the majority of us, we know who these guys play for. And even if we don't, the broadcasters usually made mention of it pretty frequently. The other one, the 10-minute 3-on-3, I think that needs to be a necessity. I know they deal with time constraints, and I will offer this as well. The shootout in a vacuum is actually an exciting thing. It's teams taking turns, taking penalty shots. Like, that's as exciting as it gets. The problem is that it's deciding games, which is the big issue I've always had with the shootout. And so if they can do these 10-minute 3-on-3s or even 15-minute 3-on-3s, look, somebody's going to get tired enough where you're eventually going to give up a goal. And I think, again, that Canada-Sweden, that was a perfect example of why you have that, because it brings a level of excitement to the game And again, when you're not deciding games in shootouts, I think that's the best way to finish it. Those overtime winners. I mean, that Marner winner against Sweden was incredible. That play was great, but that happened like 6 or 7 minutes into overtime. If that was regular 3-on-3, 5 minutes, that game would have been ended in a shootout. And I don't think that would have been fun for anybody as far as the game being decided like that.
Right.
So as far as the favorite lines from the tournament, I can't think of one from each team, but I definitely liked the Kachucks with Eichel when Team USA tried that. I think to me that was the ultimate stirring the pot line. And then obviously when they did Fight Night with Canada and they started Bennett and the Kachucks, and that was pretty fun too. But other than that, I don't think I had a specific favorite line from each team. Look, all of these teams were stacked with talent from all 4 countries. So it's kind of like dealer's choice. You just pick a line, and that's a great. Every line in the tournament was pretty good. And so I think though I'd have to say the Kachucks. I'm just going to go with the one because now that we're about a month removed from the tournament, it's hard to remember every line as well.
Right. I'm going to have to agree with you for USA. That was my line, was the Kachuk and Jack Eichel line for sure. That was just, like you called it, the pot stirring line for sure, and I loved it. And I love that we got to watch the Kachuk brothers play together. And I'm just going to leave it at the USA because I'm not giving Canada any praise.
All right, well, there you go. So
I want to clarify that's just because they beat us. It has nothing to do with the politics, so don't start making shit political, people.
Andrew's trying to start a podcast trade war with Canada.
No, I'm not.
So don't get it twisted.
Shut the fuck up.
So, all right. Well, with that, we are all out of stuff to talk about. That covers everything we talked or wanted to cover today. Danny, thanks for sending the question in. I guess real quick before we go, we have one more question from Brian in Ohio. This is directed at Andrew. Last week we had a question that was directed at me about my favorite player, and it didn't dawn on me until about 20 minutes after we did the show that I should have just asked you then who yours were. So regarding last week's question, but this time directed at you, who is your favorite player in the league right now, and who's your favorite player of all time?
Favorite player of all time? That's a tough one. But I think my favorite player of all time.
I'm going to go with the guy you have a giant poster of in your man cave.
Gr8?
Yeah.
Yeah. Autographed. I think my favorite player right now, though, it's tough. I would also put that with a tie for Patrick Kane as my favorite player of all time because he's still in the league, so it's a weird one. But I've always loved Patrick Kane. He's the greatest American-born player ever.
You think he's better than Modano?
What's that?
He's better than Mike Modano?
I think that's hard to compare because they played in 2 different eras of hockey. But I'm not discrediting what Mike Modano did.
They were in the league at the same time.
Yeah, but not for their entire careers.
No, I know. I just
start
shit.
Fucking don't start that shit with me, motherfucker.
Yeah,
anyway,
he's like 40-year-old Mike Modano, 20-year-old Patrick Kane. How'd you know?
Yeah, Wayne Gretzky and Gordie Howe were in the league at the same time, damn near. So,
hey, look at that. Gretzky's better than Howe. See, you get it.
Chill out. Gordie Howe's career was like 84 years. So
yeah, I was gonna say I could get in the NHL now and probably. Actually, never mind. Gordie Howe's no longer with us. Maybe that was one I should have thought about before I said it. Anyways,
my favorite player right now, active player in the league, I think I'm gonna have to go with Sam Reinhart. I love Sam.
He's
Reinhart.
fun, eh? Yeah, he can shoot the lights out.
I'll give you 2: Sam Reinhart, and right now Kirill Marchenko.
Nice, I like it.
Yeah.
And for those who missed it, Brian in Ohio, I was referring to myself because again, I didn't think about it till after the show, but I was like, why did I not just ask Andrew his? I mean, I know that question was directed at me, but I'm like, and we already had the question. All I had to do was ask you. So, hey, nonetheless, we got it answered. So thanks to Brian in Ohio for sending that one in.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right. Before we go real quick, I just want to say, if you're not already, make sure you're following us on social media. You can follow us on Facebook, Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast, and on Instagram at Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast. Look for the blue check mark. And as of now that I'm going to be using it regularly and trying my best, you can follow us on X at the Fresh Ice Pod.
Oh,
you can also, X is kind of a disaster, but we're going to try and make it work. In addition to that, you can follow us on TikTok at Fresh Ice Pod. Our TikTok is starting to grow pretty quickly, and I'm enjoying it. So make sure you follow us on all of our social media. If you want to send us a question, you can email us. I would prefer you email us at freshicehockeypodcast@gmail.com. It's just a lot more user-friendly. Other than that, I don't really have a whole lot left.
Yeah, then if you're good, I'm good. Thanks everybody for tuning in again. We'll be back next week. Hopefully back next week. I know, Andrew, your birthday is actually this coming Thursday, so happy early birthday to you.
Thank you.
But we, if all goes well with your travel plans this weekend, we'll try and do a show Sunday. If not, we'll see if we can squeak one in Monday. If not, in a couple weeks, we will be having a guest on, and I don't want to quite spoil it yet, just in case things,
we already spoiled it.
Did we spoil it?
Yeah, we spoiled it last week.
Oh, all right. Well, that's good. Well, Mark Mowers will be on in a couple weeks, so can't wait to have him back. I don't remember talking about that, but
I promise you we did.
This week was kind of a blur for me, so doesn't surprise me that I forgot. But nonetheless, we'll have Mao back on in a couple weeks, and can't wait to see him, talk to him, get his perspective as we're post-trade deadline. So everybody have a great week. Enjoy this official first couple days of spring as we get closer to those. And the postseason race heats up. The Ovies chase is heated up even more, and we are in for a wild next month or so.
Yep, it should be pretty exciting. So good talk, and see you guys on the ice.